Hi, I'm Jessie Oliver. I'm here to share with you today some exciting research that we have coming out to understand how people interact by sight and by sound with bird media and how that can inform citizen science design. This is a paper for Designing Interactive Systems 2020, and it's by myself, Margot Brereton, Selen, Turkay, David Watson, and Paul Rowe. I am really interested in understanding how technology can support nature engagement and citizen science, and so are my co-authors. When we look at literature related to this, there's a few exploratory studies that are quite promising in showing how people are engaged with playfully exploring the sights and sounds of nature, with photographs of birds and audio recordings of their calls and their habitats. When we look at citizen science technologies, the diversity is rapidly growing, but one of the more popular activities is to review photos of wildlife and classify them. So whether you see a lion, a giraffe, a bear, oh my. But when we look at analogous projects where people are sifting through audio recordings, searching for a sneaky beast, those projects have had fairly low participation, and they include images like this visualization of sound known as a spectrogram. It's important to look at audio closely, however, because as a bird nerd, I know that the calls of the birds are the easiest way to find them, even if you don't know what they are. So from an engagement perspective, that's important. But also from a conservation perspective, there are many sneaky beasts out there that can only be found by the sounds that they make. Take, for example, our eastern bristlebird. We did paper prototyping, providing people with visualizations of audio called spectrograms of 3 species calls. We asked them to explore and interpret the calls to the best of their abilities. We also asked them if there was any way they could identify any of the calls by species. We then provided audio to these calls and saw if they could match the calls with what they heard. See if you can give it a go. I'm curious how you went, but if you want to know what the species are, they're these 3 species. We also provided photographs and distribution maps to our participants. Distribution maps were provided because they are an important tool for birders, and we wondered if they would resonate with people that don't look for birds in their leisure time explicitly. People either explored this information by themselves or in groups. But either way, they used a think aloud protocol, and we recorded this information as well as observational notes, which we thematically analyzed to identify patterns for how people interacted with this type of information. Theme 1 relates to the challenges of exploration. Interpreting spectrograms was pretty tricky for people that had never seen them before, as they didn't relate to the variables, which included frequency, time, and the darkness representing amplitude or the loudness of a call. They often tried to whistle and sound out the calls, which is great, but even those that didn't sometimes came up with clever ways to relate to the sound. One person, for example, related the shape of the call to car tracks. We found this really interesting and wanted to explore it further into the future. It turns out this is the call of a sulfur-crested cockatoo. Some people had a lot of knowledge about the vocal repertoire of an individual species, which might actually create confusion. Deciphering call diversity was also challenging. Take, for example, our cockatoo. We provided a 2-note call, but they can make calls in a number of different ways that weren't provided to our participants. When provided a spectrogram with another bird that had a single call, it could be mistaken for that cockatoo. Turns out, though, this is the call of an eastern whipbird. It was also a challenge for particularly novice birders to connect media with birds' lives because they didn't necessarily have enough knowledge to associate all of the different media. If we look at eastern bristlebirds, for example, this bird was assumed to be young by one participant because of its brown coloration. However, a lot of birds, like eastern bristlebirds, remain brown their entire lives, and there could be implications for the way that the bird sounds and its associated age. Theme 2 related to the benefits of a media assortment. Providing 4 types of media was really effective in eliciting enthusiasm in a variety of ways. It was also really effective in conjuring diverse knowledge, whether they were novices or experienced birders. Our most inexperienced participant, for example, even had memories of seeing a David Attenborough show where a bird made the sounds of a camera shutter, and she talked about the acoustics and how she remembered that. Another example of diverse knowledge relates to the eastern whipbird. These birds are quite furtive, but they're common, and you can hear them often in the forests of southeast Queensland. They have that distinctive whip-like call that looks like this, and often when given the spectrogram alone, people could work it out based on the shape and trying to whistle that call that they see. Our most expert birders asked us specifically when seeing the picture of the whipbird whether or not we included the call of the female, which makes a habit of calling directly after the male. Let's have a listen at each of these calls. First the male and then the duet male and female. Providing assorted media also helped people with resolving ambiguities they encountered. Take, for example, our sulfur-crested cockatoo. Most people could recognize this bird by sight, but when they were provided the spectrogram first, it wasn't quite enough information for them to typically work out the call unless they had already worked with spectrograms and cockatoos in the past. When they heard the call, though, they could easily match up that information. The call made it very clear which spectrogram it was. Providing assorted media also allowed us to observe solving through cooperation, given that each of the participants brought a lot to the table, whether strategies for problem solving, perceptions of nature, or prior experience with acoustics. We then explored our themes and subthemes to understand how we could develop lessons that could help to inform interactions with audio and other aspects of nature in future design research. Next, we're going to explore these lessons by looking at existing technologies that people are using to learn about birds and their calls. The first lesson relates to bridging knowledge and context. If we take this example, this is Birdsong Hero, which is an application online created by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology to engage people with matching the sounds and visuals, spectrograms, of birds and their calls. Media salience was a very important attribute of our study, and when we look at this critically, we realize that the scales are not necessarily consistent across calls, which limits the amount people can compare them. We also wonder if people even really take note of the way that the birds look or their names, given that there's not really any explicit reason for them to investigate those carefully, given that the game is very much focused on the audio itself. Making accessible associations is going to be a really important aspect for bridging knowledge because people have different levels of knowledge, and species information varies regionally and it also varies culturally, and the perceptions of birds, as we see with that acoustic versus visual recognition of the different birds, is really important to consider as we are trying to help people learn about birds and become more curious and engage with tasks like citizen science. Our second lesson was to facilitate long-term engagement. In this example, we're going to look at the Thayer's birding application with an extensive amount of information, and this is really great for birders, but if we're trying to engage people that don't even know they have an interest in birds yet, it might be helpful to have growth of knowledge with a purpose. We also find that diversity and task difficulty is going to be important to consider as we move forward, and whether, for example, we need to design explicit tasks for citizen scientists versus novices, and whether people can customize the complexity of what they're doing, and how people can work collaboratively through these tasks. In conclusion, our exploratory study provides an understanding of barriers and opportunities for audio interactions, multisensory interactions that enrich experiences and deepen perceptions that people have of nature, lessons to design enticing technologies that foster interactions with audio and nature, future directions to explore how knowledge differs and potential for cooperation between people. This study would not be possible without a wide variety of people helping us out. First and foremost, thank you to my amazing participants I have had the honor of working with. I also want to thank people that contributed bird photos, technical support, editorial support, and funding. If anyone would like to reach out to me, please don't hesitate to sing out via Twitter. Have a great day. Bye.